Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. It's a great pleasure of mine to be here today to speak to you on behalf of the Cambridge Muslim College and to talk about a mosque built on Taqwa, lessons from a Qur'anic passage. I'll be going through 4 sessions over the coming period of time, this Ramadan, looking at a very significant passage of the Quran, a passage in Surah At-Tawbah, and it's between verses 107 to 110, referring to a mosque built on Taqwa and of another mosque, a mosque built for disunity. And this will be an opportunity to talk about a group that were there present with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the early Muslim community in Medina called the Munafiqeen, or the hypocrites. And this group is known for lacking sincerity, lacking true belief. And this I want to contrast with what Muslims should be trying to develop, which is taqwa, which is God consciousness or awareness or piety. And in this time of Ramadan, it's a time when we're looking into ourselves and we're trying to peel back some of the inherent sort of general habits we have, some of the things that accrue to us over the year, that cling to us, these bad habits and these lack of awareness. And we want to come back to Allah. We want to come back to a true consciousness of God in our lives. And so this story, or this events are in Medina, and also related to the understanding of the Quran and what the Quran mentions about these events, I think will be really interesting for us to explore together over these sessions. And so I'm going to talk in this first session specifically on the background, the contextual background for this verse. And in the second session, I will come on to discussing the first of the verses and getting more into the content. So with that, I'd like to talk first about some of these historical events that we need to be aware of to really understand what's going on with this narrative. And so what I'm drawing on here, and just to say this really clearly, is I'm taking from the traditional seerah literature. I'm not engaged in a kind of reconstructive academic investigation into authenticity and all those things, which I do in other parts of my work. But I'm really just saying, well, what does the seerah narrative, as traditionally presented in the sources, such as the seerah of Ibn Hisham, how can what we know from that story, those narratives, as well-known events, what can they do to tell us about these situations of the heart? So there's an outward aspect, what's happening with the Prophet ﷺ, what's happening with the community, how are those communal dynamics working? And there's an inward aspect, how are people's hearts being affected? How are people reacting or acting in terms of sincerity or not? So as you're all aware, the Prophet ﷺ made a hijrah from Mecca to Yathrib, which was at the time called Yathrib, and now we know it as Medina. And when he arrived in Yathrib, he came across various different groups. There were tribes of the Arabs, the Aus and the Khazraj, the Arabs who were there in Medina at the time. There were a number of Jewish clans in the city, and there were the Muslims who came with him, the Muhajirun. There were also Muslims who had embraced the faith from the Aus and Khazraj, which were known as the Ansar. And what happens, of course, is that the power dynamics that already were there in Medina shift. They change because now there's a new group that's arrived, there's a new leader that's arrived. And this was a city that was riven with violence. It was riven with conflict and alliances and power plays between the various groups. And unlike in Mecca, when the Muslims had been oppressed and were on the back foot, and so there was no reason why someone would pretend to be a Muslim, in Medina things have changed. Suddenly, when the Prophet ﷺ comes to Medina and he manages to build an alliance with many of the Aus and Khazraj, and this had already happened before, they had come to him in Mecca and so on, and then this meant there was now a motivation for people to embrace Islam in a non-sincere way. So this was the Munafiqeen. They would embrace outwardly, but inwardly they did not have faith in God and His Messenger. And this then becomes a series of events over the period of the Medinan years of the Seerah, so nearly about 10 years, in which the munafiqeen, or the hypocrites, are a constant thorn in the side of the community. And what I want to highlight as we go, and all of this is going to build near the very end of the whole period, with this mosque built on taqwa being contrasted with the mosque built for disunity, and that's what's going to be the sort of the heart of the discussion. But over our time talking together, we're going to touch on some wider themes in terms of the inward human and also in terms of our social relations. So now we're going to turn to the initial effects or the initial rise of the hypocrisy or munafiqeen in Medina. As I mentioned, some of the people joined in apparently part of the religion because they saw some material advantages. The demographics of Medina had changed. Suddenly you had the emigrants there. The emigrants were making what's called mu'akha, or a kind of a brotherhood with certain members of the Ansar, and they were being integrated into the community, and this formed a powerful base, as well as the rivalry between Aus and Khazraj had been sort of softened, because from both sides there was now a new group that they could join. They could be believers together, and as the Ansar, they could overcome those previous difficulties they had as these two different clans of Arabians. They could just be Ansar, be believers, be one. This caused tension with some existing power factions, and one of the most important was a member of Medina called Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul, and he was the kind of the leader of the hypocrites, we could say. People mentioned that, you know, before the Prophet ﷺ came to Medina, they were going to crown him king. They had already started like making the crown. So he was about to gain this power, and then it all drew away from him, and he suddenly had to go along just being an influential leader of a faction amongst the Muslims. And although he stayed nominally amongst the Muslims, he was very influential in some of the activities leading to difficulties for the believers, and a lack of enthusiasm for the efforts of the community. And in essence, he's the absolute opposite of someone with taqwa, right? Taqwa is something that no one can see, right? No one can. It's not about what you're doing outwardly. It's about how you are inwardly responding. Now, of course, it will have impact on your outward actions, but ultimately, your taqwa is something internal to you. It's your awareness of God and your sincerity to God in staying away from what's wrong and what's bad. And this figure, Ibn Salul or Ibn Ubay, he did not have this, and because of this, he caused a lot of problems for the Muslims. There's a number of events in which the hypocrites caused difficulties. For example, after the Battle of Badr in the second year after the Hijrah, this was an unexpected victory for the Muslims. And the Prophet ﷺ, who initially had some challenges, was suddenly boosted by this, and people were flooding into Islam. And in fact, many of the people who hadn't actually embraced Islam yet joined the Muslims after Badr. And this was a time when the hypocrites sort of started to suddenly claim stronger faith, suddenly trying to benefit. And one of the things that they were known for is they would fluctuate, and they would also shift from day to day or from moment to moment. So the hypocrites in one setting would be promoting the believers, and in another setting, when the Prophet was not there or the believers were not there, they would turn away and speak down about what was happening. Another factor is that another situation here was that the hypocrites only were able to see things in a kind of very worldly way. So they would, if the Muslims did well after Badr, they would be up. But then next time after Uhud, when the Muslims didn't do so well in that conflict with the Meccan Quraysh, suddenly they would be down and saying, you've got no hope. And so they wouldn't see things in this wider vision. They wouldn't see that ultimately it's not about always what you succeed with in this life. It's about laying the foundations for your success in the hereafter. For your best efforts, you might still fail in this world. You don't know. Allah knows what will happen to you. But in the hereafter, if you're sincere and if you have taqwa, you have the reward. And so the hypocrites were completely blind to this reality. When it comes to this battle of Uhud, which was in the 3rd year after the Hijrah, for example, Ibn Ubay actually declares that that his things were not arranged as he liked. He thought that they should fight from within Medina. They ended up going outside and fighting outside of Medina, and so he actually withdraws and takes 1/3 of his army with him. So this figure Ibn Ubay, and this shows as well that the Prophet ﷺ relied on having these different factions and groups and tribal leaders. He didn't come and completely replace the existing social structure of his time. He worked with what was already there and the family groups and the tribal groups that were in existence. And this meant that someone like Ibn Ubay was able to draw back a number of the hypocrites with him back into Medina and made the battle even harder for them. And in the end, they had a number of losses, and it was considered to be not successful in the same way as Badr. And what happened here was that after that, the hypocrites would then start to cast doubt on God's promise to the believers that He would give them success and give them help, and they started to try to use this as a campaign against Islam. Nevertheless, the Prophet ﷺ did not actually seek to get any kind of retribution against Ibn Ubay. He was patient with him and with the hypocrites in general. The Prophet ﷺ, his whole policy with this aspect of hypocrisy was to let ultimately God judge them when they were to come in the hereafter. If someone verbally says they're a Muslim and proclaims their Islam, they're treated as a Muslim in the Sharia. So the Prophet ﷺ did not seek to unmask them, to expose them. He let their own actions do that in the fullness of time. Another example of the test of the hypocrites during the years of Medina was the event known as the slander of Aisha radiallahu anha. And this was an event in which Aisha radiallahu anha lost a certain locket or a piece of jewelry, and she was separated from the group and was later brought back by one of the young believers, and rumors started to be spread that she had been unfaithful to the Prophet ﷺ. And eventually the Qur'an exonerates Aisha, and the hypocrites were the ones who were spreading these rumors, who were sort of tale-telling and generally backbiting and doing all of these negative things against Aisha. And here we can see some lessons for ourselves in terms of, are we being upright in making sure we verify information before we spread it? Are we making sure we don't accuse people of things when we don't have the full information? Are we having that taqwa in ourselves in the way we interact with other people, whether it's in our household, whether it's in a workplace environment, whether it's anywhere else we happen to be? So this is something that in Ramadan we need to be careful about. And especially in Ramadan, we know that we need to restrain our tongues, and we need to make sure that we don't let those sins build up by speaking in a bad way and actually negate our fast and negate the value of our fast, we could say. And so this is all really important for the development of ourselves, and trying to develop the sort of taqwa we did see from the good believers, or the Sahaba who were truly following the Prophet ﷺ, as opposed to the hypocrites. So one of the things that we can then sort of see is that there are different aspects of, on the one hand, hypocrisy versus taqwa. Hypocrites throughout the Medinan period, they had an ego to them. They had a sense of entitlement. Someone like Ibn Ubay felt that he deserved to be the leader. He was jealous of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is something that we need to look out for in ourselves, because Allah is going to give some of us something more than someone else. Allah is going to bless us with one thing, but not give us something else, and someone else we know is going to have that blessing. And we need to try to be reflective on ourselves, and we need to be open, that Allah gives whatever He wants to whoever He wants, and we need to know that things are not going to be given to us on a plate, and we can't assume that something is ours. Another thing that we're going to see from the hypocrites is an avoiding of sacrifice, avoiding of challenges, a weak faith that's quickly turned by something in the world has gone our way or not gone our way. All of these things were features of the hypocrites, and they're the exact opposite of the features of taqwa. A sincerity, ikhlas towards Allah, forbearance, hilm, to be patient and to trust in God, to have a unity with other Muslims and with other members of our family and of society, and to work with people, and to actually give and sacrifice for the greater good in the best way. So all of these aspects we can see. On the one hand, the hypocrites, they are a particular social group. It's a particular historical phenomenon, a group that is spoken about by Allah in the Quran. And at the same time, their qualities and their characteristics are something that are still with us and can even be held, obviously, by believers. Not everyone who can have some of these characteristics has to there be a disbeliever, or not be a full hypocrite in that sense. But they still can have. You can have aspects of these negative qualities that we should try to overcome. And it's actually taqwa that's going to help us do this, because taqwa is about guarding ourselves, about shielding ourselves from sin by being aware of God. And it's something that's easy to say and much harder to live up to. And in Ramadan, we actually have fasting as a shield, and our fasting is going to actually help us increase our taqwa. Because when you fast for Allah, then in true sincerity, this is something that no one can see. That's why Allah says that it's for Him in the hadith. It's for Him because no one else knows whether we've been true to our fast. Maybe someone goes off and sneaks some food, but only someone who is a true believer, a true mu'min, will carry out a fast. And so if we have any thoughts or worries or doubts or whispers at all, if we're even just fasting for the whole day sincerely for Allah, just tell us that we're a believer, alhamdulillah, and we shouldn't have any doubts about that. And then we can try to work on our other qualities. Are we backbiting? Are we getting angry even during fasting? Are we being stingy? Are we not supporting others or sacrificing properly? And all of these things are things qualities we can work on. So this is something we need to do in our communities and in our families and on a personal level to check ourselves. Let's not fall into these negative traits associated with the hypocrites. Let's remain in a good state throughout our Ramadan, throughout our time in the blessed month, but also as a platform to do that in our lives generally, to ingrain those habits of taqwa and to not fall into these kind of minor hypocrisy aspects in our lives. So this sort of the disease of hypocrisy, or this affliction of hypocritical standards where we don't live up to what we say that we believe in. We don't live up to our deen. Taqwa can become the remedy for that. Taqwa can help us to regain the Islam that we are on paper or believe in the words of our Prophet ﷺ and in our Quran from Allah. And Ramadan is the time when we can start to realize what that taqwa feels like again, when maybe it's been a bit missing, it's been not fully there, it's been there fleetingly. Ramadan is a time to dwell in that taqwa throughout the day as we keep the fast, as we maintain the fast, to wake up for suhoor and to be making our du'as at the night time, waking up for suhoor, fasting throughout the day, and then giving thanks at iftar and praying in our tarawih and nighttime ibadah, reading the Quran, and constantly being reminded of Allah's presence in our lives. And in that way, we can actually avoid this hypocrisy and embody true taqwa. So we ask Allah to make our inward intentions consistent with our outward actions, to not be one person in front of the public or in front of our colleagues or in front of our families, and to be someone else internally or in our secret moments. And we ask Allah to give Ramadan the ability for us to have a greater tawfiq for that and to benefit from that. And with all this, we can actually get to a place where we can be better believers and avoid these negative traits internally and also with each other. So in the next session, I'll be turning to A Mosque Built for Disunity. I'll be talking about a particular incident that happens right at the end of the period of Medinan times with the hypocrites, in which they sought to build a mosque solely to sow discord with the community. And so this will give us a further chance to reflect on the theme of taqwa and the dangers of hypocrisy. Thank you all for your attention today. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.